Okay, well I just popped out to the workshop to try and get back on the lathe after a bit of a gap away from it, and I've got this very large walnut bowl that I'm going to second or third turn. It's been hollowed out with these as the cores from the bowl saver, and this one's got a hole in the middle where it pulled out on the end grain. It's been drying for 6 months now, and that's the small centre one. So this has got quite a lot of wobble on it. One thing I'll have to deal with is a fairly large crack in it. I've had to take quite a bit off the outside to get that baby round, and now I've got to trim the face and also take quite a lot out of the inside to get that round. As you can see, it's going to end up being a lot thinner. So I've started off using a round carbide, that seems safer on the day, and then migrated to using a square carbide to trim the bottom. And getting some reasonable shavings, some reasonably long, so not too bad. And as the reach got too long, I put on the big old curved tool rest and just try to take out some of the inconsistency at the base with the freshly sharpened Simon Hope sort of negative rake scraper, which produces some relatively nice shavings. Then a quick sort out of the outside to match the inside. I've got to fill this crack which goes all the way through at some point as well. So I'm now going to just do a couple of bands around the outside just to add a bit of extra detail. So I sanded through all the grits and then sealed the outside in order to make sure that when I tackle the crack I don't stain the wood as a result of any of the epoxy. First though, trim out the raggedy edges of the slot with the small Ryobi rotary tool. Noisy little devil, so wear ear protectors. Anyway, so after I'd done the outside, I came back and did the inside as well, and tried to shape the slot to make it easy for it to be filled with epoxy. So I'm going to fill from the outside, so I'm taping up the inside so the epoxy doesn't ooze out, and then also put protecting tape either side of the crack, because it's going to go everywhere if not. Because I'm trying to get the colour to sort of vaguely match, I'm actually mixing some of the sawdust in with the epoxy to sort of create a stiff base layer before I do any further finishing, perhaps with CA glue. Pack it well in and then have to leave it overnight. The dust will delay the curing of the epoxy from 15 minutes in this case to about 24 hours. And then I experimented whilst the epoxy was still soft, but as it was stiffening I've filled the surface of the epoxy with some more wood dust so that when it's abraded it's got a slightly more woody finish. Okay, so while the other one's gluing up, I've transferred the middle core onto the lathe. The bowl felt really heavily distorted, and before I actually started to try and turn it out, because it was in grave danger of there being insufficient thickness, I thought I'd take it back off the lathe and check it out. Oh, well that's interesting. So I've discovered that the top of the bowl is relatively round, but the tenon isn't. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into the button jaws and recut the tenon. As you can see, there is still quite a lot of warping, so I've had to take out a reasonable amount of thickness, but because the rim is also split and fretted, and I've also got the button jaws to deal with, I decided to leave an edge detail, a thickening at the edge, which I'll probably texture later on. So I can now mount it back on the normal jaws, and I think I've saved over half the thickness of the bowl by doing it this way. Otherwise I would have had grave danger of the inside being bigger than the outside. And now a lot easier to sort the inside out with a traditional bowl gouge. Easy does it, particularly on the corner, because it is a bit delicate. And then time to get the big Sorby tool out and do a bit of texturing on those two bands. And then a bit of texturing on the front edge of the rim with the small crown texturing tool. Not quite sure how this is all going to turn out, because as I say, the edge is a bit fretted and I do want to disguise some of the marks. But yeah, got a bit of texture there, could do something with probably. Because the filled end checking is a bit unsightly, I've decided to rub some gilt cream in and then cut that back just so that it masks the splits a little bit. So now I've got to dress the bottom to get a recess to match the inserts. I've already got one in stock made from ebony, but I've still got others to turn. So that's quite a good fit, just need to glue that one in and then add a bit of more gilt cream to the texture to highlight it. So I left that to glue and set, and then next day got back to the original bowl. So this is the big one now, back on the chuck, and sorting out the epoxy overspill, again using the small rotary tool to sand and abrade the excess epoxy off. After a little bit of CA and sort of dust filling to get it nice and smooth, then started to treat the outside again with a bit of gilt cream just to try and highlight the texturing a little bit. And then after putting it on like the other bowl, I tend to pull it back a bit, this time with a nylon brush, just to sort of soften it, because I didn't want the colour to really dominate, I just wanted it to highlight. So I've got some offcuts of African blackwood, which I think are technically clarinet bells. I've been lurking for about 20 or 30 years. I put a tenon on both ends because I decided I wanted to turn some small discs first. So with it rechucked, I then turned some little tenons on each disc so that I could rechuck them and then decorate them, and then parted off a series of them using the parting tool. And then using a spindle gouge, doing some pull cuts, nice sharp tool because the ebony is really hard. Faced it off to a slightly dome finish and then used a scraper to finesse the finish, ready for some texturing. So I started off with the small crown wheel, trying to get that little tiny like fleur-de-lis in the middle, and then holding it at different angles just on the leading edge of the wheel, just doing a few more textury things, and then holding the wheel at about 30-40 degrees and just pulling it into the wood in the other direction, and that makes the pattern go in the other direction. And then end on using the flat part of the cog to create a sort of stippled effect. Didn't like all of that, so cleaned some of them, the stipple off to create a nice clean edge. and then use the point tool to demarcate the different texture zones. And then sand up to 600 grit to see what we got. And then brushed out the dust with a nylon brush before rubbing some gold embellishing wax into the pattern, and then buffing that off to leave the wax just inside the pattern. On this particular disc I wasn't happy with the edge detail, so I just created a bit of a cove and a bead with a spindle gouge just to sort of make the edge look a bit neater. And then I wanted to highlight the edge of the cove, so I got the texturing tool out and just put a little touch on the edge of the cove just to create a little bit of embellishment there too. The first one, and then I did several more different sizes using similar techniques, each one being of course unique. For this next one I decided to use the big Sorby texturing wheel, but with the extremely fine cog on it, and that produced some really nice delicate effects. I actually preferred that, I think, to using the small crown one in this case. So back to the bowls. I've trimmed out a recess in the centre, and I'm now going to glue this one in. So I lightly abraded it all back, did some Yorkshire grit to cut it even smoother, and then cleaned that off, and then hard wax oil. And also hard wax oil on the outside, lightly rubbed in with a 600 grit sanding disc. Let that dry overnight, and then remount it on the very big Axminster button jaws to turn off the bottom. And then, having reduced the tenon, shaped it to create a little foot, and then cut another recess for the second medallion to be inserted at the bottom. So there we have the big one. It's about 340mm across and about 160mm deep. And then I thought, time to play with the little turntable I've got, just to show how fantastic the patination is on it. And the gold has just been used to just highlight it rather than hide that beautiful walnut colour. And this is the finished centre bowl with its discs inserted, and a little bit of copper fill as well where necessary. And there's the rather plain central one, didn't need much filling, and I've just done a bit of texture and gold infill without an insert on the bottom, and then there they all are together. The fretting of the edges has meant that each of the smaller bowls has had to be reprofiled quite separately to the main one, so they don't really look as if they're all coming out of a nested set, but believe me, they are.